Welcome back, everyone. So, this is going to be the first part in a new series on Robert William Willy Pickton, serial killer out of Canada. So, first, we're going to get into a little bit of background information on him in this video, and then I'm going to tell you what he was charged with and what he was convicted of eventually. So, Robert William Willy Pickton was born October 24th, 1949. Robert lived and worked as a pig farmer there in outside the Victoria, British Columbia area. He lived on the farm with his brother. He had, at over the years, had several employees, but one of his mainstay employees was Billy Bill Billy Kid, like a goat, Billy Kid, Hiscock, and he also had an employee by the name of Robert John, which the police were never able to really find after the arrest and all this went down. He may have been a victim of uh, Robert Pickton, but nobody really is sure about that. So Robert Pickton was convicted of second-degree murder of 6 women in total. They had originally charged him with 27, but the judge in the case had split 6 of them and then set 20 of them into another case. And he did this because he believed that bringing through the all 27 cases at the same time would have made the trial too long, would have been too much of a burden on the jurors, and believed that the trial probably would have lasted close to 4 years before they were ever able to, send this to the jury to actually be heard, deliberated on. So, like I said, he was convicted of second-degree murder of 6 women in the Vancouver area. While he was originally incarcerated on this charge, he confessed to who he believed was a fellow inmate, but it was actually an inspector general agent, which I guess in Canada is basically a police officer there, that he had killed 49 and he wanted to make it an even 50, and he had a victim already in mind that he had planned on killing. So I was saying that about the additional 20, those 20 were set aside in 2010 by and he was given a stay by the Crown. Again, the political and criminal system in Canada is a little bit different. So I would have to equate that to here in America. That would basically be, like a grand jury says, okay, we're going to set these aside, and you can charge them on these ones, but and then later on you can charge them with these ones. Which basically, the 6 second-degree murder cases, he would have gotten life without any possibility of parole on those. So everything else was basically just overkill. It didn't necessarily give closure to the families of all the victims, but it did definitely make sure that he was never going to leave prison alive. So Robert again worked on the farm with his brother David Pickton, who there is very little I could actually find on the internet doing investigative work with researchers. I was only able to find a little bit about David. David is a very reclusive individual and never really spoke to the media. And as far as his life, what he was charged with or anything else, I mean, very little is out there. Billy, the Billy Kid, Hickston, an employee on the farm, longest tenured employee, I should add also, wasn't charged with any crimes at all in relation to these murders. At one point, um, Robert Pickton had actually filed for and received a nonprofit status from the Canadian government and said that he was turning his pig farm into a nonprofit for to host parties, raves, sports gatherings, and alike. And he called it the Piggy Palace Good Time Society. That's the name he picked for it. And he did host several parties, some of them legal, some of them completely in ignoring the orders the court had set down. The farm had gone into disrepair, and they wanted him to take care of certain things on the farm, and he refused to do it. Instead, basically thumbing his nose to the local government and to the police, but they eventually shut him down. But instead of actually closing down for good, he went ahead and just kept on doing his business anyways. So after a New Year's party he had thrown, the police actually came in and they started to escort everybody off the property. Um, but before that actually happened, he held gatherings for a rugby team, softball teams, and other groups that he deemed worthy, along with raves. It was a very popular place, according to the electric music groups that are out there. Quite a few people actually remember hosting or being at raves there on the pig farm. Very popular place, apparently, at one point. So a little bit of information about Robert Pickton now was Robert Pickton had an extensive collection in the house of astrology and spiritual awakening books. Now, according to Bill Hiscock, he never he never saw him reading them, but he liked to collect them. But so that was one of his bizarre side hobbies. Along with, he also collected trophies from each and every woman that he murdered there on the property. He also had the hobbies of hunting, fishing, and gathering junk, according to Bill Hiscock. His main focus was just about anything that somebody was going to throw away that he deemed had a scrap value. It could have been a washing machine, it could have been a radio, but he really had a fascination with alarm clocks in particular for some reason. And when they came in to actually bulldoze a couple of the outbuildings there on the property after all this was done, they found something like close to 300 different alarm clocks in one of the buildings. Over the years, William Pickton had made several bizarre statements to friends, neighbors. Um, Quite a few of his neighbors in the area were definitely afraid of him and what was going on there on the farm. But he had made statements to friends and those who lived in the area that the fastest way to kill a heroin junkie was to load a hypodermic syringe and with windshield washer fluid and shoot them up with that and watch them suffer and die. And yet, none of these things actually clue people in that there was something seriously wrong with this man. So he kept trophies again of all of his victims. He kept bones, teeth, ID, clothing, other personal items, jewelry from every single one of his victims. Now, what his downfall um, was in March 23rd, 1997. He was arrested for stabbing a sex worker, a prostitute, Wendy Lynn Eistetter, 8 times. And She in turn stabbed him. He had her handcuffed to a post with one hand. He had stabbed her 8 times, trying to kill her, and he was going to bleed her out like he did with the hogs. And she ended up freeing herself, stabbing him, and then the two of them both went to the hospital at the same time. She was in the ER recovering from her stab wounds, and he was in another part of the hospital getting treated for his stab wound for them because she got the knife from him and stabbed him. But at that time, they took his boots and clothing articles from him, and they locked it up as evidence. But they didn't necessarily test his boots and the clothing he had on him right away. Now, the case against Wendy and him, the entire case was dropped because the district attorney, I guess basically whatever it is in Canada, dropped the charges because they didn't believe that the prostitute, who was a known drug addict, would have been a very trustworthy individual on the witness stand. She never showed up for any of their preliminary hearings, so they dropped the case against him. Now later on, when they finally did get around to testing the evidence in this case on William Pickton's boots, they found the DNA of 2 other women on his boots, and both of them had been listed as missing at that point in the case. So yeah, that eventually was the largest part of his downfall. That, and when they went to when they had him incarcerated, and they went back to the farm to do preliminary investigation. They had search warrants to search the property. They found human remains in the pig pens. They found clothing and bone fragments scattered in the wooded area. And they found William Pickton's trophy collection. Yes, they found jawbone from one victim. They found bloody clothing from 2 other victims. And it went on from there. So this is going to be the end of part 1 in the Willy Pickton series. Tune in tomorrow for part 2.